The Wyoming wind was howling through the gaps in the old oak barn, but all I could focus on was the hum of Julian's brand new SUV idling in the driveway. He didn't even step out of the AC. He just rolled down the window and tossed a manila envelope into the dirt. Right at my feet. Inside was a land deed and a rusted key to a 30-year-old truck. 10 years of sweat, 10 years of caring for his mother while he was chasing millions. And this was my severance package, a pile of scrap metal and an eviction notice. I picked up the manila envelope, the heavy scent of expensive leather from Julian's SUV still lingering in the dry Wyoming air. 10 years. 10 years of keeping this ranch alive while he was in the city, building an empire on the back of my hard work. And now, he was tossing me aside like an old piece of farm equipment. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. The betrayal had grown so cold inside me, it felt like stone. I slid the land deed and the rusted key to the old truck back across the gravel toward him. Julian's eyes narrowed, his patience clearly wearing thin as he checked his watch. "I'll sign everything," I said. "But I don't want the land. I don't want your money. And I'm not going to fight you for the horses." Julian stared at me, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Then what do you want?" I looked past him, toward the porch where his mother, Evelyn, sat staring blankly at the horizon. "I'm taking Evelyn with me." Julian froze, his mouth slightly open in disbelief. To him, his mother was a liability. In the last few years, her mind had begun to wander. She was a shadow of the woman who had built this place. To Julian and Sienna, she was just a ghost haunting their new, shiny life. Sienna had already been scouting nursing homes 3 states away, anywhere cheap enough to keep her out of sight. Julian's face suddenly shifted, the confusion melting into a look of pure, greedy relief. He couldn't sign the papers fast enough. He thought he was finally rid of his biggest burden. But as I helped Evelyn into the cab of that beat-up truck, I knew something Julian didn't. In the world of men who only value what they can sell, they often forget the value of the person who knows where all the secrets are buried. You see, when Julian handed me that rusted key, he thought he was giving me junk. But in reality, he'd just handed me the only person left who knew the true value of the dirt he was standing on. Every gift has a price. And Julian had just paid his with the only thing he actually had left of any real worth. Underneath Julian's moral cleansing, he was just a man trying to buy a clear conscience for the price of a scrap truck. He didn't realize that when you strip someone of their dignity, you're the one who ends up bankrupt. I stepped into the house one last time, the air heavy with the scent of Sienna's expensive perfume, a sharp, cloying smell that didn't belong in a ranch kitchen. She was leaning against the counter, casually swinging a silver-plated bridle. My breath hitched. It was Julian's grandmother's, a family heirloom I'd polished every week for 10 years. Now it was just a toy in the hands of a woman who didn't know a gelding from a mare. I ignored her and went straight to Toby's room. He was sitting on his bed, his eyes glued to a glossy catalog of high-end gaming rigs. "Toby, honey," I said, my voice trembling just a little. "Pack your things. We're leaving." He didn't even look up. "I'm staying here," he muttered. "Sienna said if I stay, Julian will buy me the Titan Z setup, with the dual monitors and the Pro headset." "Toby..." I stepped closer, my heart sinking. "You can't stay here. This isn't about computers. It's about being a family." He finally looked at me, but his eyes were cold, distant. "You're just going to live in that crappy old trailer, Mom. Sienna says you're lame for choosing a broken truck over this place. I want the Titan. I want to win." I stood there, paralyzed. This was the materialistic brainwashing Evelyn had warned me about. Sienna hadn't just taken the house, she'd hijacked the soul of a 10-year-old boy. She'd turned his love into a transaction. I looked at the silver bridle in her hand, then back at Toby's empty gaze. I realized then that I couldn't drag him away. If I forced him, I'd only have his body. His heart was already locked in a digital cage built by his father's greed. I turned away, the weight of the betrayal crushing the air out of my lungs. To Julian, everything was a deal. To Sienna, everything was a trophy. And to my son, I was just a bad investment. I walked out of that house, leaving the silver bridle and my heart behind, realizing that sometimes you have to let a tree lose all its leaves before you can even hope to save the roots. The old truck groaned as I shifted it into gear, the sound of the engine rattling against the silence of the valley. Behind me, the trailer swayed, a humble, metal box carrying every scrap of my life and a woman who no longer knew her own name. We moved slowly, passing the white fences I'd painted by hand and the barns where I'd spent countless nights midwifing foals, while Julian was miles away, drinking expensive scotch in climate-controlled offices. As I reached the edge of the property, I pulled over. The dust from the road began to settle, coating the windshield in a fine gray shroud. I stepped out and looked back at the ranch one last time. The sun was dipping below the horizon, bleeding a deep bruised purple across the sky, a final silent witness to everything I was leaving behind. I felt a sharp, hollow ache in my chest as I looked at the light in Toby's bedroom window. People will probably ask, how could she just leave her son with those monsters? But looking at that house, I realized that if I had tried to drag him away now, I'd only be taking his shadow. His heart had been bought with high-speed internet and the hollow promises of a woman who viewed him as an accessory. I wasn't abandoning him. I was retreating to build a fortress. I reached into my pocket and gripped a small, crumpled piece of paper, a treasure map I'd drawn for his 6th birthday. "Toby," I whispered to the wind, "I'm going to let you taste the bitterness of a love bought with silver, so that one day, when the toys break and the walls of that house start to feel like a prison, you'll remember the warmth of the mother who walked away to save you." I climbed back into the cab and glanced at Evelyn. She was humming a soft, tuneless song, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. She didn't know where we were going, and in that moment, neither did I. Yeah, but as I pressed my foot to the gas and watched the ranch shrink in the rearview mirror, I realized that for the first time in 10 years, I could finally breathe. The air out here was thin and cold, but it was mine. We were heading into the dark, but I wasn't afraid, because sometimes you have to lose everything to realize you were the one holding the deck all along. The interior of the trailer was cramped, the air smelling of old upholstery, and the rain beginning to tap against the tin roof. I was stirring a pot of thin soup on the small stove, my mind miles away. Back at the ranch, wondering if Toby had even noticed I was gone. A hand suddenly gripped my wrist. It wasn't the weak, trembling touch I was used to. It was firm, intentional. I turned around, expecting to see the same vacant stare Evelyn had carried for years. But the fog was gone. Her eyes were sharp, piercing, as clear as a Wyoming winter morning. "Clara," she said, her voice steady and resonant. "Stop." I froze, the ladle still in my hand. You're okay?" Evelyn smiled, a sad, knowing expression. "I had to know, Clara. I had to be a burden to see who would actually carry me. If a man treats his own mother like an expired contract, he'll treat his wife like a scratch pad. My son chose his toys. He chose that woman. But you chose a broken old woman and a pile of scrap metal." She reached under her pillow and pulled out a small, weathered leather notebook. Many people wonder why a mother would trust her daughter-in-law more than her own blood. It's simple. Only a heavy load tells you who has the strongest shoulders. Julian thinks he's selling that land to the mining corporation tomorrow. He thinks he owns the legacy. He's wrong. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Under the old wine cellar behind the 3rd stone from the hearth, there is a lockbox. Inside is the true deed and my husband's final will. The ranch was never Julian's to sell. It's mine. And now it's yours." Julian knows the price of everything, but he has no idea what any of it is worth. Tomorrow, we aren't just going back for your dignity, Clara. We're going back to take the ground out from under his feet. I sat there in the dim light of the trailer, my heart racing. The woman I had spent 2 years protecting had been the one guarding me all along. The justice I thought was lost wasn't just a dream. It was sitting right in front of me, holding the keys to the kingdom. I drove back to the ranch under the midday sun, the dust trailing behind me like a ghost. I only needed one thing, a small wooden music box hidden in the back of the pantry, the only thing my own mother had left me. But as I stepped toward the porch, a piercing whinny shattered the quiet. I ran toward the stables, my heart hammering against my ribs. Sienna was standing there, her face a mask of fake horror, pointing at Julian's prize stallion. The horse was thrashing, blood trickling from a shallow cut on its flank. Julian came charging out of the house, his face turning a dark, dangerous purple. "What did you do?" he roared. Sienna stepped back, her voice trembling with practiced precision. "I caught her, Julian." She was trying to hurt him. She said if she couldn't have this place, no one could. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words died in my throat. Julian didn't wait for an explanation. He lunged forward, his hand catching the tea tray Evelyn had left on the porch table. With one violent motion, he sent it flying. China shattered against the wood, the tea spilling like an ugly stain. Then, he turned that rage on me. He shoved me, hard. I stumbled back, my boots losing their grip on the rain-slicked earth, and I fell. The mud was cold and thick, soaking through my clothes, staining my skin. Julian stood over me, his silhouette blocking out the sun. "You're pathetic, Clara. I gave you a way out with some dignity, and you come back here to butcher my animals? Get out! From this second on, you are dead to me. No more favors, no more mercy. I want you off this land before the sun sets, or I'm calling the sheriff." I looked up at him, the grit of the earth between my teeth, and for a second, the world went completely still. I saw Sienna's smirk. I saw Julian's blind, arrogant entitlement. They thought they had finally broken me. They thought this was the end of the story. But as I wiped the mud from my face, I felt a strange, cold laughter rising in my chest. They were so busy enjoying their little victory that they didn't see Evelyn standing in the shadows of the doorway, her eyes wide open, her mind as sharp as a razor. Julian had just thrown away the only person who had been standing between him and total ruin. He thought he was pushing me into the dirt. He didn't realize he was just helping me find the spot where I was going to bury his empire. The boardroom at the ranch was filled with the smell of expensive cologne and the cold, sterile presence of corporate lawyers. Julian sat at the head of the table, his hand hovering over the contract that would sell our history to a mining conglomerate for $50 million. Sienna was right beside him, already scrolling through luxury real estate listings in Aspen. Julian looked at me, a smug, dismissive grin on his face. "Last chance to leave quietly, Clara. Sign the waiver and take your scrap metal truck before I have you escorted out." I didn't say a word. I just stepped aside as the heavy oak doors swung open. Evelyn walked in, her back straight, her gaze cutting through the room like a blade. Julian's pen hit the floor. "Mother? What are you doing here? You should be in bed. You're confused." "The only one confused here, Julian, is you," Evelyn said, her voice echoing with a power I hadn't heard in years. She tossed a thick, leather-bound file onto the center of the table. "That contract is worthless. According to my husband's true will, the one you tried so hard to pretend didn't exist, you only inherit the right to manage this land as long as you provide direct, personal care for your mother. The moment you traded me for a severance package and handed Clara a rusted key, you defaulted. You're not the owner, Julian. You're a trespasser." Julian's face went ghost white, but Evelyn wasn't finished. She turned her eyes towards Sienna, who was clutching her designer bag as if it could protect her. "And as for the boy, Julian, you've spent so much time chasing an heir to your empire that you never bothered to check the bloodline. Evelyn slid a DNA report across the table toward him. Toby is a wonderful child, but he isn't yours. The Sienna's little miracle from 10 years ago belonged to that photographer in Chicago, the one you paid off to go away. The silence in the room was deafening. I watched as the lawyers slowly closed their briefcases and stood up. Sienna began to hyperventilate, her carefully constructed world of silver bridals and aspen mansions collapsing in a heartbeat. Julian looked down at the papers, his hands shaking, realizing that in his rush to sell everything he thought he owned, he had ended up with absolutely nothing. He had traded a loyal wife and a devoted mother for a lie, and now the bill had finally come due. The empire Julian had built on lies and arrogance didn't just crumble. It vanished like a mirage in the desert. Within 48 hours, the bank accounts were frozen, the corporate credit cards were declined, and the mining company had vanished, leaving Julian with a mountain of legal fees and zero leverage. I watched from the porch as Sienna threw her designer luggage into the back of her convertible. She didn't even look back at the house or at Toby. To her, this place was only ever a stage, and now that the lights were out, she was looking for a new show. Toby stood by the fence, clutching the high-end gaming headset Julian had bought him, a useless piece of plastic now that the power had been cut. He watched Julian scream into a dead cell phone, his face twisted in a desperate, ugly kind of panic. I saw the moment Toby's world shifted. He walked over to Julian, his voice small and uncertain. "Dad, what about the computer? What about the trip?" Julian didn't even turn around. He just shoved the boy aside, in his voice a jagged edge of pure venom. "Get away from me, Toby. I don't have time for this. You're not even mine. Do you understand? You were just a bill I was forced to pay." Toby froze, the headset slipping from his fingers and hitting the dirt with a dull thud. The Titan Z setup didn't seem so important anymore. He looked at the man he had chosen over me, realizing that Julian didn't love him. Julian didn't even see him. He had been a pawn in a game he didn't know was being played. Julian stumbled out into the middle of the parched field, clutching a stack of contracts that were now nothing more than scrap paper. He stood there, surrounded by nothing but wind and dust, screaming at the sky as if the land itself owed him an apology. He had the deeds, the signatures, and the fancy titles. But he was standing on ground that no longer belonged to him. He was a king of nothing. I walked over to Toby and placed a hand on his shoulder. He didn't pull away this time. He just leaned into me, his tears carving tracks through the dust on his face. I looked out at Julian, a small, frantic figure in the vast Wyoming wilderness. He'd spent his whole life trying to own the world, only to realize that when you strip away the money and the lies, you're just a man standing alone in a field of weeds. Julian stood by the rusted gate, his designer suit torn and his eyes hollow. He had nowhere left to go. No friends, no mistress, and certainly no bank account to catch his fall. I could have called the police. I could have watched him walk down that dirt road until he disappeared into the horizon. But a quick exit is too easy for a man who spent his life avoiding the truth. I walked up to him, tossing a pair of worn work gloves into the mud at his feet. "You've spent 10 years pretending you're too good for this soil, Julian. Now, you're going to learn what it actually takes to keep it. I'm not throwing you out, but you aren't the master here anymore. You're a farmhand. You'll sleep in the quarters, you'll muck the stalls, and you'll earn every meal by the sweat of your brow. If you walk away, you have nothing. If you stay, you might, just might, remember how to be a human being." Julian looked at the gloves, then back at me, his pride struggling against his survival. Finally, he bent down and picked them up, his hands trembling. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. And the silence was the first honest thing he'd given me in a decade. I turned toward the house where Toby was waiting on the porch. He looked fragile, his eyes red from crying, the weight of the last few days hanging heavy on his small shoulders. He had seen the man he idolized crumble into a coward, and it had left a hole in his heart that no gaming PC could ever fill. I sat down beside him, not saying anything at first. We just watched the sunset over the Wyoming hills. "Mom," Toby whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry. I thought the shiny things meant he was right." I pulled him into my arms, letting him lean into me. "Shiny things are easy to love, Toby. It's the dirt and the hard work that tell you who someone really is. We're going to start over. No more lies, no more silver-plated promises. Just us and this land. It's going to take time to heal, but for the first time, we aren't running away. We're planting seeds, and this time, we're going to make sure the roots go deep enough to survive any storm." The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of bruised purple and gold. I sat on the porch of the main house, the wood cool beneath me, watching Toby in the distance. He was brushing down one of the colts, his movement slow and careful, a far cry from the boy who only cared about frame rates and plastic toys just a few weeks ago. Beside me, Evelyn rocked gently in her chair, a cup of warm tea in her hands. She didn't need to say anything. The clarity in her eyes and the way she watched the land told me everything I needed to know. We had survived the dust. Julian was somewhere out in the back pastures, learning for the first time in his life what it meant to actually earn the air he breathed. But he wasn't my burden anymore. I looked at the vast, open fields and realized that a legacy isn't something you sign away on a glossy piece of paper. It isn't found in a bank account or a mineral rights contract. A true legacy is the soil you've tended, the people you've refused to abandon, and the quiet strength it takes to choose kindness when the world tells you to be bitter. People talk about making it as if it's a destination you reach in a fancy SUV, but standing here, I knew better. Kindness is the only investment that never loses its value. It's the only currency that matters when the lights go out and the mansions crumble. We had lost almost everything, only to find the one thing Julian could never understand. Odd that the richest person in the world isn't the one with the most gold, but the one who has a home built on the truth. The air was turning cold, but for the first time in 10 years, I didn't feel the chill. I was exactly where I was meant to be. And as Toby looked up and waved, a small, genuine smile breaking across his face, I knew the dust had finally settled. The contrast between the two worlds was never more evident than in the way they occupied the silence. In the master suite, the air was thick with the scent of Sienna's expensive French perfume, a sharp synthetic floral that felt out of place against the raw Wyoming wind. Julian paced the hardwood floors, his fingers twitching as he stared at the glowing screen of his phone. "It's not enough, Sienna," he hissed, his voice a jagged line of greed. $50 million is a start. But the mineral rights, that's where the real blood is. Sienna didn't even look up from her vanity mirror, her reflection cold and calculated as she applied a layer of deep red lipstick. "Then take it, Julian. The old woman is a shell. Clara is a martyr. Use them. That's what they're for. Don't let sentimentality ruin the view from our new penthouse." Their bond wasn't built on love, but on a shared hunger, a parasitic connection where every touch felt like a transaction. They were two predators circling a dying fire, waiting for the embers to fade so they could claim the charcoal. But downstairs, in the dim warmth of the kitchen, the atmosphere was different. The air smelled of dried sage and the cedar wood burning in the hearth. Evelyn sat at the heavy oak table, her weathered hands wrapped around a ceramic mug. I sat across from her, watching the firelight dance in the deep lines of her face. There were no grand plans here, no talk of millions or penthouses, just the steady, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock and the shared understanding of 10 years of sacrifice. I reached out and placed my hand over hers. Her skin felt like parchment, thin and fragile, yet there was a strength in her grip that Julian would never understand. "We're leaving tomorrow, Evelyn," I whispered. She didn't look away from the flames, but she squeezed my hand, a silent promise echoing in the quiet room. "The land remembers, Clara," she said, her voice a low, melodic hum. "It remembers who bled for it, and who only wanted to bleed it dry. We aren't just taking our memories. We're taking the soul of this place with us." In that moment, with the gap between the two floors felt like a canyon, upstairs they were building a kingdom of glass and lies. Downstairs, we were tending to a bond forged in the dirt and the rain, a connection that no amount of corporate gold could ever hope to buy.